Good morning. And then all that has divided us will merge, and then compassion will be wedded to power, and then softness will come into a world that is harsh and unkind, and then men and women will be strong, and then women and men will be gentle, and then no person will be subjected to another person's will. Of all the things that divide us, race may be the most pernicious. Of all the things that divide us, race may be the most simple, the most complex, the most obvious, and the most destructive of achieving a dream of mercy and justice. May 25th, 2020, just before 8 p.m., Minneapolis, Minnesota. A 46-year-old black man attempts to buy a pack of cigarettes at a convenience store with a $20 bill. The store clerk says is an obvious fake. Police are called to the scene by a store employee who describes a man as awfully drunk and not in control of himself. Two officers in their first week on the city's police force arrived to the scene. After briefly checking with the convenience store clerk, they approach George Floyd, where he is sitting in his parked SUV. Officer Lane draws his gun and orders the suspect to put his hands on the steering wheel. Mr. Floyd complies, and Officer Lane holsters his weapon. Someone parked behind Mr. Floyd's SUV begins filming the scene at 8:10 p.m. There's a brief struggle, and Mr. Floyd is pulled from his car and handcuffed. A second police car comes and guards the SUV. At 8:12, Officer Kyung sits the suspect against a wall in front of a restaurant. At 8:13, Mr. Floyd is told that he is under arrest and led to the police car across the street. He falls to the ground next to the car, and the two officers pick him up and lean him against the car door. According to prosecutors, Mr. Floyd tells the officers that he was not resisting, but that he was claustrophobic and did not want to enter the car. At 8:17, a third police car arrives with officers Derek Chauvin and Tu Tao, who join officers Kyung and Lane. Officer Chauvin assumes command. According to prosecutors, Floyd told the officers he could not breathe when they tried to force him into the car. Around 8:18, security footage from Cup Foods, the convenience store, shows Officer Kyung struggling with Mr. Floyd for at least a minute in the driver's side back seat, while Officer Tao watches. At 8:19, standing on the passenger side of the vehicle, Officer Chauvin pulls Mr. Floyd across the back seat from the driver's side to the passenger side, then out of the car. Mr. Floyd, still handcuffed, falls to the pavement, where he lies on his chest with his cheek to the ground. Mr. Floyd stops moving at around 8:20, though he is still conscious. At this point, multiple witnesses begin to film the encounter. At 8:20, a witness across the street begins recording a video showing Officer Chauvin kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck, Officer Kyung applying pressure to Mr. Floyd's torso, and Officer Lane applying pressure to Mr. Floyd's legs, while Officer Tao stands nearby. Mr. Floyd can be heard repeatedly saying, "I can't breathe," "please," and "Mama." Mr. Floyd repeats at least 16 times that he cannot breathe. At one point, a witness says, "You got him down. Let him breathe." After Mr. Floyd says, "I'm about to die," Officer Chauvin tells him to relax. An officer asks Mr. Floyd, "What do you want?" Mr. Floyd answers, "I can't breathe." He states, "Please, the knee in my neck, I can't breathe." And we all know what happens after this. Consider these questions. Does it matter that Mr. Floyd is 46 years old? Does it matter that he is described as awfully drunk and not in control of himself? Does it matter that he had a criminal record? Does it matter that he refused to get into the police car until he was forced to? Does it matter that the first two officers to arrive on the scene were in their first week on the job and ceded their authority to an officer with 19 years' experience? Does it matter that Officer Chauvin had won 2 Medals of Valor during his time in the service? Does it matter that his official record with the force includes 18 complaints? Does it matter that the police department decided no disciplinary action was necessary in 16 of those cases? Does it matter that in Minneapolis, in the period from 2012 to 2014, the incarceration for blacks was nearly 10 times that for whites? Or that in 2015, 50% of all youths imprisoned in the state of Minnesota were black youth from Hennepin County? Does it matter that in the same year, 35% of adult inmates in Minnesota were black? Does it matter that during the 5-year period from 2015 to 2020, the department reported its officers used violence against black people 7 times as often as they did against white people? Does it matter that George Floyd was an African American male? So much matters, and so much shouldn't matter. All of the questions are worth considering, and all are worth answering. But the salient point is that we all know that if Mr. Floyd was white, he would not have died like he did on Memorial Day. If he was white and awfully drunk, he would not have had the life choked out of him. If he was white and not in control of himself, there surely would have been a struggle, but not one that would have led to his death. Racism killed George Floyd. The fact that the officer who killed him had 18 complaints filed against him and yet retained his job indicates that poor judgment and abusive behavior had been tolerated. There are 20 gangs in Minneapolis and over 1,000 gang members. We must understand the stresses under which police officers operate, but nothing justifies institutionally sanctioning the routine abuse of power, as indicated by 18 complaints against one officer, and nothing excuses racist policing. When I saw the video documenting the murder of George Floyd 4 weeks ago, my first reaction was shock and revulsion. The officer had his hand in his pocket and a blank facial expression. The only change of expression I saw was a frown as he adjusted his knee on the neck of a black man lying in the street. He seemed unconcerned that he was being videotaped as he murdered his victim. My stomach was in knots. And then CBS switched to the next story. But we all know that that was not the end. Shock and anguish almost immediately changed to anger, and anger to rage. The irrational impulse to burn it all down overtook the affected population in large numbers. Anger led to fury, fury to destruction, destruction led to looting, looting and destruction led to condemnation in some quarters and justification in others. Our country's divisions across racial lines once again were made manifest, once again took over the headlines, once again inflamed passions on both sides. What in our own hearts do we need to pay attention to? My friend and colleague in ministry, Ruth Morgan, presents this self-inquiry. Do I first ask, when contemplating an action, how comfortable is this? What will people think if I take this action? How will this change my life? What will it cost? Who will gain the advantage? Is it morally correct? Is it fair and equitable? Is it loving and grace-filled? Then she says, I am asking myself this because the question that first comes to my heart reveals what is in my heart. Yes, the questions that we ask ourselves first reveal our heart and indicate the basis on which we make our choices. The fundamental question is, do I get involved? If the answer is anything but yes, we are deceiving ourselves. If racism has been institutionalized in this country, and I believe it has, we deceive ourselves if we don't acknowledge that we are already involved. By the virtue of the privilege we white people have, we are involved. Let's talk about that term, white privilege, because for many of us, it's loaded. We want to believe that whatever success we've had in life has been by virtue of our character, our work ethic, our determination, our focus, our talents, and our abilities. And it's true that all these things are contributing factors, but they are not determining factors. We are like fish swimming in water. Our social environment is the water in which we swim. We're not aware of the water we're swimming in because it's so much our natural environment that it doesn't occur to us to question it. For us, it's all we know. And for many of us, it's all we want to know. An article by Peggy McIntosh called White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Backpack, gives us some valuable insights, and here are some of them. I can, as a white person, if I wish, arrange to be in the company of people of my own race most of the time. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and in which I would want to live. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such a location will be neutral or pleasant to me. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. I can turn on the television or open to the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. When I am told about our national heritage or about our civilization, I am told that people of my race made it what it is. I can be sure that my children will be given curriculum materials that testify to the existence of their race Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of my financial reliability. I can arrange to protect my children most of the time from people who might not like them. I can swear, or dress in secondhand clothes, or not answer letters, without having people attribute those choices to bad morals or the poverty or illiteracy of my race. I can speak in public to a powerful male group without putting my race on trial. I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. I have never asked to speak for all of the people in my racial group. I can remain oblivious to the language and customs of persons of color who constitute the world's majority without feeling in my culture any penalty for such oblivion. I can criticize our government and talk about how much I fear its policies and behavior without being considered a cultural outsider. I can be pretty sure that if I ask to speak to the person in charge, I will be speaking to a person of my own race. If a traffic cop pulls me over, or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be pretty sure that I haven't been singled out because of my race. I can go home from most organizations I belong to feeling somewhat tied in rather than isolated, out of place, outnumbered, unheard, held at a distance, or feared. I can be sure that if I ask for legal help, my race will not be held against me. These are just some of the examples listed in the article. Ms. McIntosh goes on to say that such privilege confers dominance because of one's race. And so we are left with the question, do we want dominance? Or do we want equality? And if we affirm that we want equality, we must dismantle the system that assures us dominance. That means being willing to give up some of our white privilege. Not because we want to be disempowered, but because we want a society where we all have an equal chance of seeing justice done and having peace in our hearts. Let's look once again at Reverend Ruth Morgan's questions, this time listing them in an order not based on fear, not based on simple self-interest. When considering an action, what if my first question is it loving and grace-filled? Second, is it fair and equitable? Third, is it morally right? Fourth, will there be an advantage for all parties? Fifth, how will it change my life and the lives of others? Sixth, what will it cost? And let's put the other questions at the end of the list. How comfortable is this? And what will people think if I take this action? Though these may be reasonable considerations, let us admit that to use them to guide our actions guarantees that there will be no change, reinforces the status quo, and continues our commitment to ensuring that our white privilege endures, guarantees our commitment to cultural dominance. I am asking today, what are the actions we can take to effect change, to do our part, to ensure that our society becomes more fair and equitable? First, we must be willing to examine our hearts and transform ourselves by making sure that the questions we ask are aligned with our goals of social change, not the preservation of our privilege. How will this benefit me? And what will people think? Don't cut it. Second, we must listen. Listen, listen, listen to the experience of people in racial minorities and learn from their experience. Third, we must look for opportunities, asking ourselves, what are the concrete steps that we are taking to create systemic change, as opposed to simply voicing our anger and dissatisfaction? What are our resources? On May 28th, one of our city commissioners posted this on her official Facebook page. I do not know yet how to put into words what I feel, but I want the Black community in Bowling Green to know that I see you and I am with you. I am working to host a local conversation. To the broader community, it takes work to dismantle racism in our hearts and our community. Simply saying, I am not racist, is not enough. I welcome you to join the conversation and the work that we must do. This is an opening. This is an invitation. Do we respond, or do we keep scrolling? Do we say, how will this benefit me? The question we are so often taught to ask. Or do we say, what's loving and grace-filled? What's fair and equitable? What's morally right? In response to Dana Beasley Brown's invitation, I asked, can the Commission issue a statement strongly condemning this most recent series of travesties of justice? And her immediate response was, thank you, I will. The next day, the City Commission and the Sheriff's Office issued a joint statement doing just that. This does not solve the problem, and no single action will, but it's a step. We have to look for opportunities to make our voices heard and prompt the steps, one step at a time, to dismantle what we know is unjust, destructive, and killing the communities, the spirit of our communities, and our nation. We can write letters to the editor of our local paper, advocating for equal justice and condemning abuse of power. What's to stop us? We can make our presence known by attending the demonstrations which have picked up momentum and have already prompted such changes as the removal of the statue of Jefferson Davis from the rotunda of the Kentucky State Capitol, the resignation of officials whose leadership on these issues has been ineffective, the arrest and prosecution of police officers who terrorize the citizens they are sworn to protect and serve, the changes in policy in such cities as Atlanta. Start small. The killing of George Floyd infuriated me, turned my stomach into knots. And then something occurred to me. Through my work on the city's Kwanzaa celebration for 7 years, I've made connections with a number of members of Bowling Green's African American community, but for some reason, very few have been my friends on Facebook. So I had no idea what they were thinking or saying at this crucial time. How can I be aware of the conversation if I don't take steps to be in contact? So I sent out Facebook friend requests to 10 or 12 people and now feel more connected, more able to respond. Is that something you can do? Can you connect to helpful city commissioners? If you can take 3 things away from this talk today, I suggest that they be these. 1, examine your heart to see where its prompting takes you in terms of actions that are moral, life-affirming, loving, and grace-filled. 2, listen to the voices of those who have been oppressed. Watch the movies 13, Just Mercy, Selma, 12 Years a Slave, Loving, Hidden Figures, The Birth of a Nation, and Black Klansman. Read books such as Between the World and Me, Just Mercy, or anything by Toni Morrison. 3, examine the areas in your life where you benefit from white privilege and look for opportunities to dismantle it. And when they appear, follow through. We can do this, but only if we do it together. And then all that has divided us will merge. And then compassion will be wedded to power. And then softness will come into a world that is harsh and unkind. And then both men and women will be gentle. And then both women and men will be strong. And then no person will be subject to another person's will.